Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Today we will be continuing our journey into MIDI, building off of what we were working on last time, and moving into a discussion, a more sort of music theoretical discussion of various musical parameters that we're going to be working on for the next 2 weeks or so. So, last time, as a reminder, what we did is we went into Studio One and we dug deeper into the presence instrument and started to investigate what's going on in the MIDI window. So, as a reminder, just like when you're dealing with audio, this ruler across the top is time going from left to right. The numbers you see, depending on how you have your visual interface set up, but they're probably going to be beats and measures. Those beats and measures are then divided into subdivisions, and we talked a little bit about that, and we talked about, importantly, quantizing MIDI input. So what I did is, as a reminder, I recorded a beat, a rhythm, using a drum machine, and I wasn't totally with the metronome, and I used the quantize function in Studio One to nudge each of those MIDI note messages to align with the grid automatically. So I recorded my own performance, and then I used Studio One to clean it up, so to speak. So that was really an introduction to editing MIDI within the MIDI window. I recorded something, and then I quantized it. Of course, I could have gone back through and realized, oh yeah, this snare drum got moved over to where it says 5 here, but really I want it to be just a little bit over to the right. So I could quantize and then go back in and move. I can still move these individual notes around independently. What we see here in this screenshot of the MIDI window is we see chords. And we know that these are chords because they're 3 different notes happening at the same time, ending at the same time. If I wanted to, one of the really cool things about MIDI is all of these notes are independent. So I could remove, if I wanted to, let me go back. If I wanted to, I could remove one of the notes from one of these chords. I could move it to a different note while the other notes stayed the same. I could change the velocity or volume of just one of these notes. So all of these notes are independent from one another, and that is very different than audio. So if I played a major chord, but I meant it to be a minor chord, I can easily change that post in MIDI. That would be literally impossible if I was dealing with audio. So today I will be talking about melody and melody in relation to MIDI. And this will be a way for us to continue to dig deeper into MIDI editing and to think about the relationship between MIDI editing and music composition. You all, shortly, will be working on your next assignment, which is what I'm calling a song assignment. So you will be composing a short song that is going to follow a particular form. And what genre, what style is up to you, but I want you to be following a particular formal structure, and you will be composing using just MIDI. So what we're working up towards as we learn all these things about MIDI, we're also learning things about different musical parameters or elements of music, so we can think about how to go about composing something. So this is just a reminder from the earlier lecture about the history of MIDI, or the prehistory of MIDI, we should say. And that when we look at the MIDI editor window, which is also called the piano roll, it's literally like the piano roll in one of these early player pianos. So as you can see here, the piano roll in like a player piano from 1900 had these perforations on a sheet of paper, and as it was scrolled, as one gear pulled the paper like magnetic tape. Eventually, the mechanism that would be used for magnetic tape. Eventually, these perforations in the paper are being read by a mechanism that's driving the keys. And this becomes really very, 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 very similar to how MIDI language works and how it looks when we're dealing with it in a DAW like Studio One. So again, here this is scrolling rather than from up to down; it's from left to right. But here we can think of these as perforations that correlate to particular keys on a keyboard, just like here. Okay, so the other thing I really want to emphasize here, and this is because one of the things I'm going to be talking about today is musical notation in relation to MIDI, is that when we look at this perforated sheet of paper in a piano roll, this is a musical notation. When we look at the MIDI editor window in Studio One or whatever digital audio workstation you're using, we are looking at a musical notation. So today I'm going to be introducing us to the relationship between the MIDI editor window and traditional Western musical notation. So the first musical parameter that we're going to be discussing is melody. Later, next time, we'll talk about harmony. We'll then talk about rhythm. We'll talk about timbre and texture. And we'll talk about form. Today, we're talking about melody. So what is melody? Let me give you, I want to give you a little time to sort of think on your own. Think, how would you define melody? So I imagine that now that we've kind of really had some time to think about it, it may seem, defining melody may seem obvious at first, but when you actually have to put it into language, it becomes a little more difficult. So I'm just kind of imagining how like some things that we can come to agreement on. So what is melody? Melody is something sung, right? And what I mean by that is that melody being if we think of melody as the hook in a pop tune, if we think of melody as the main theme in a work of classical music, if we think of melody as the tune in folk music, it is the thing that you sing. It's the thing that you hum. And if we go dig a little bit deeper into that, something that is sung must be one note at a time. Now, of course, there are throat singers who can sing multiple notes at a time. However, in general, sung music, if you are going to sing, you can only sing one note at a time. So we can think of melody as a sequence of single notes. Now, note that, no pun intended, I say sequence of single notes, plural. So, of course, just one note, if I just go, ba, one note does not a melody make. So it needs to be a sequence of single notes at least. Let's say that, let's take this as an example of, let me actually, I'm going to move over to Studio One, and I'm going to pull over a presence instrument. I am going to load a program. So again, this is sort of taking you through the steps of setting this up in Studio One. So I'm going to load a program. Let's do some sort of keyboard thing. How about a jazz organ? Okay, and okay, so back to what I was talking about in regards to melody. It is more than one note, right? So for instance, does not a melody make? Okay, so what about this? Now, we've got a sequence of two notes. It's maybe more melodic because it's more than one note, but I would argue that this is still not really a melody. How about this? Okay, so now we have 5 notes, right? There's still something that is, and while this is clearly much more melodic than just, there's something about this melody that seems, well, incomplete. So this feels like an incomplete melody. A melody, there's something there, it's a fragment of a melody. And again, a fragment of something is not the whole thing. So a fragment of a glass jar is not a glass jar. It is a fragment of a glass jar. So okay, so something like that gives you much more of a sense of completeness, right? Of closedness. So where do we get this sense of completeness or closedness in melody? It has a lot to do with beginnings, middles, and ends. So I start this melody on this F. I go away from the F. Then stepping up, I jump down, jump way up to the highest note I'm going to play. And sort of like step my way down. So. I've returned to the note that I started on. this isn't the only way to produce a sense of completeness and melody, but it is a super common one. So there are any number. So, but again, it isn't just the return to where I started, right? Okay, so we could say, all right, that's a melody. It still feels a bit like a fragment. There is no true, in all circumstances, answer to this, like how many notes you need to have a melody. This is going to be different in different genres. However, we can say that the sense of fullness or completeness to a melodic idea is going to rely on a certain threshold of information. So that feels incomplete, even though I'm returning to the note that I started on, because really it's just one melodic trajectory or shape. It's just step up, back down. So in a melody doesn't just need to have a return home, but it has to have some sort of complexity or sequence of changes in direction to get us a sense of a shape. So a melody must have a shape. So I mean, this is a very simple shape. It's like we could imagine kind of just looking at a very simple triangle or something, but something like this. Or whatever, something like that gives us several changes in direction between notes, which gives us a real, much more of a complex, intricate shape. And that gives us much more of a sense of completeness because that melody that's something that might be catchy or might sound unique. This, I mean, you can hear that sequence of intervals of relationships between notes in so many different melodies. So that could really kind of come from anywhere. But as soon as I add these other notes, it begins to have more of an identity, more of a shape, more of a sense of completeness. So returning to the slides here, it's a sequence of single notes that produces in the listener a sense of completeness. So a beginning, a middle, and an end, somewhere where it starts and somewhere where it finishes. Now, let me add this caveat that intentionally incomplete melodies still rely on our understanding of melody equals completeness for their rhetorical effect. So in other words, I'm sure all of us can think of really awesome music that is really effective and communicates something very deeply emotional by creating a sense of anticipation and incompleteness to the melody. Like where the melody ends, it feels like it still hasn't completed itself. It still hasn't resolved. And it's intentionally done that way. Now that melody is relying on this sense of resolution that we have in our culture around certain melodic ideas and creates this sort of emotional or rhetorical effect by anticipating this sense of incompleteness in the listener. One more caveat that I have to add here, of course, is that melodies must be music. So anything that is a melody is music, right? But music does not need to be melodic. There are plenty of musics we can think of that really are not melodic at all. So while we are looking at melody, and I am offering right now what might seem like a rigid or maybe too confined, maybe even too Western of an approach to understanding melody, I think it's useful to think about melodies in these more rigid terms, but melody does not need to be in music, and great music does not need to be melodic. So this is just a way of using. So I want to kind of use the term melody in a more restricted way, where we're thinking about a sequence of single notes that produces a clearly complete musical idea. So melody. So now I'm moving over to melodies and music notation. So can anyone recognize that melody? Bum 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 bum. That's right. It is the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody. All right. So what we see here is the musical notation representation of that melody of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I'm going to spend a little bit time analyzing this melody today as a way for us to think a little bit more deeply or understand a little bit more deeply what I mean when I say a melody has a shape. Then we're going to move over to Studio One and talk about how we would transpose this melody into Studio One from the sheet music. And then start to use all this knowledge to think about how we might mess around with some pre-made loops in Studio One. All right, so yes, it is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Let's just enjoy this song. This is taken from the film version of The Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. So let's just what I'm going to do is play this scene. This is where she sings the famous iconic melody to The Wizard of Oz. What I'd like you to just kind of listen to the melody itself. I want you to listen to that. Listen to the form. So listen for when the melody completes itself, right? We're going to hear this melody multiple times. So I want you to listen to when it completes itself, and I want you to listen for when there is a different melodic idea other than the really famous Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody. Like, when does another melodic idea come in? And so how many times do you hear this melody? How many times do you hear something else? And I also want you to pay attention to the relationship between the music and her choreographic performance. So like how she does this, both not just as a singer but as an actor. So here we go.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why fly beyond the rainbow. Why, oh, why can't I?
Okay. So let's get back to analyzing this melody. So some things you might have noticed. First, before we dig into the more music theory side of things, just kind of talking about the performance and the setting and the staging and all of that. I mean, one of the first things is Toto. Toto is so cute. The other is how she, as she sort of like makes her way through this farm, kind of goes back and forth between looking up in this sort of like wondering about what's beyond, you know, the rainbow, wondering about what's outside of the farm and her life here. This sort of desire to explore, to find some other world, and then sort of following back to the farm, like whether it's leaning back into the hay or resting on, you know, the wheel, et cetera, et cetera. So this performance where she's going back and forth between looking to the sky and then coming back to the earth, really is like it really comes out of the structure of the melody itself, and so I want to make that case. So let's go back to the melody. What do we see here? We see dong dong dun do 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 dong bong 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 bong. So whether or not you can read music notation, something that you will notice as I sang and went and used my cursor to go from note to note is that the way music notation works is these different note heads have different rhythmic values or different durations. And this we can think of as relating directly to the grid in a digital audio workstation or in Studio One. So a circle note head with a stem is a duration of 2 full beats. So we could imagine a MIDI note being extended from here for 2 full beats of a measure. And again here, 2 full beats. A filled in note head with a stem is 1 full beat. And so we can imagine a MIDI note extending for this amount of space. A filled in note head that is connected with what we call a flat a beam up here is half of a beat, right? So these durations, these rhythmic durations are shorter than these, which are shorter than these. Those are really and this is a whole measure. So a non-filled in note head with no stem is a full measure or a full bar. So really, those are the only rhythmic note values we have. We have half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and whole notes. And you can see that certain measures have more notes in them than others. The first measure has 2 notes. The second measure has 5 notes, 2, 1, 2, 5, 5, 1. Now, one thing, so basically we have, so if we're looking at this this melody, we'll also know that there are some repeating rhythmic patterns. So the melody is 8 measures long. The first 4, you have the 2 half notes followed by this rhythmic dun 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 dun. So if I just was doing the rhythm dun 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 dun. So really we have basically we've got 3 different rhythms if we're thinking about comparing these different measures. So it's either done, done, or done, 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 or just done. So, so what we can see here is how the first half of the melody and the second half of the melody are related in that they pretty much have the same rhythmic shape, except the second to last measure in the second half of the melody repeats this faster rhythm. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. So now this is to sort of emphasize that melodies always have some sort of rhythmic component, because if you have a sequence of single notes, those notes are going to be of different durations. So we have this melody, but I want to talk about the difference between background and foreground in melody. So the foreground is the melody that, as I've been singing it, like so. Excuse me. So, so that is the foreground of the melody. Now, but let's note it. Let me point something out to you. There are all sorts of other patterns that are happening on sort of layers underneath this, the foreground. So I pointed out that you have this rhythmic idea, these different rhythmic ideas that happen at different times. So dun 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 dun, which happens 3 times. So we can start to see how the melody is kind of broken up into these different sections rhythmically. But also, as far as pitches, as notes are concerned, we have more than just this surface melodic shape. So, dum bum 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 bum. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sing the notes that really are on the very beginning of each measure. So in this first one, I'll sing both notes, but then what I'm going to do is just go from the main note in each measure to the main note in each measure. So, bong, 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 bong. So there is a background shape to the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody that jumps up an octave and then walks down the scale one note at a time. So in other words, now, so that makes sense. It's like a nice sort of background shape to really hold the logic of the melody together, because really it's just walking down the scale, right? However, this also really works with the way that it connects to the lyric. Somewhere over the rainbow, where bluebirds fly. I can't remember the lyrics, but why can't I fly too is basically the premise, right? The basic idea. So the leap up the octave is really like this longing, So, and it goes up; it doesn't go down. So, bum bum. So you're leaping up an octave. You're sort of going away from home, a lot, as far as you can go, which is the full octave, let's say. So you're going away from home. If home is where the melody starts, you jump away from home, sort of striving for this other place. And then as you're sort of like thinking about this place, you are slowly coming back down to reality. And so that's really what this melody kind of evokes, I would argue, if we really think about the background as this jumping up the octave and then walking back down, and now I'm thinking, so I want to go somewhere else, but now I'm thinking a little bit, I don't really know quite how to get there. Maybe I'll just keep hanging out at this farm with my cute dog, Toto, right? And now let's talk about how this plays out in the whole structure of the song. So I asked you to pay attention to when the melody happens, how many times it happens, et cetera, et cetera. So were you able to figure that out? You're right. It happens twice. Then we have another melodic idea, which is like, if something, 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 da 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 da. So that's the B section. That happens once. That happens over the course of, again, 8 measures. Then we return to the main melody, the A section. So we go through Somewhere Over the Rainbow all over again. And then there's this little tag at the end. So we get the main melody, which I'm calling A. So A, B, the second melody, then back to A. And then we get this little tag at the end, which is like a fragment of the B section. So she's like, if lemon drops and blah, 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 and and then she finally walks up the scale, and that's how the song ends. And so it ends not with a sense of completeness. So the melody itself is all about closing off these different sections, where it's about leaping away from home and then slowly returning to home. But the song, which starts off as a very traditional A-A-B-A form, so you go A, you do A again to really establish that, in fact, A is the main melody. It is, this is the thing. Then you go to B, you go away from home to a new idea, then you return to home. So she does all of that, but at the very end, and let's listen to that little section again, there's this little incomplete tag. So not only is it an incomplete B section, it also kind of makes the song itself incomplete, because we returned home in A. We got the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody again, and then we just get this little fragment. So let's just play that little bit here. Sorry.
If happy little bluebirds fly.
So again, and this fits along with what she sees, right? The clouds part, and she sees the sun coming through, this other world, this thing beyond the rainbow, and this is where she has this moment.
If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I?
So again, she climbs up, she has this fragment of the B, she climbs up the scale, and if you've ever seen the movie or the musical, you know that this happens in a point in the musical that is before she goes to Oz. So we get this sense that she will, in fact, go to this other magical place. Her hope has remained alive, and she has this still has this striving away from home, away from that lower C note. So now we've talked about melody and how it has shape, how it has rhetorical effect, how it has a foreground and a background, And we've talked a little bit about I've talked about the rhythmic values of these notes. Let's talk about the note names. Now, don't worry, you are not going to be tested on being able to name any of these note names. But it's really important for us to talk about this because if we're going to deal with MIDI, we are dealing with note names, right? So would you rather know of middle C as MIDI note number 60, or would you rather think of it as middle C? Either way, you're going to be dealing with with this note, however we name it. So in MIDI, it's 60. In sort of standard Western music notation, it's middle C. So what we see here is musical notation. We've got a treble clef on top and a bass clef on bottom. These clefs tell you or tell us how to read these lines. These lines are always going to be 5, and the lines will be a particular note based on what the clef is. So when we see a treble clef, which is the most common clef that we see here, and it sort of circles up and then wraps around this line here. So this line that gets crossed over and wrapped around is G. In a bass clef, we have this sort of colon here. The colon goes around an F. So what these clefs are telling us is they're telling us how to read these 5 lines, and these lines and spaces correlate to notes. Here, we can see that this first line is E. The first space is F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Those are all white keys on the keyboard. Same in the bass clef, G all the way up through A. Those are all the white keys. I am not playing any black keys. I'm just walking up the keyboard and skipping the black keys. Okay, that the same logic was true for the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody because it's in the key of C. I don't play any black keys. We're not going to worry about black keys for now. I'm just going to say that anytime you see musical notation that has no sharps or flat signs, it's all white keys. Okay? So now let's go over into Studio One and see how these two things can correlate, music notation and Studio One. Here I am in Studio One, and here I've got a presence instrument set up, and it has that organ sound that we've been listening to. And here I just double clicked on my timeline, and what that has produced is a block of MIDI that correlates with this section of my timeline that I had highlighted. And then if I double click again, that will open up the MIDI editing window. Okay, so let's see here. Right. So what I want to do is kind of walk through the relationship between music notation and the MIDI piano roll, and then we're gonna sort of switch modes and look at some ways to mess around with some of these MIDI loops. So if I go over here, I've got here I have these images. This is the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody. This over here are my note names that are so I can know what note this is based on where it is on the staff, like a space or a line. And I know that as I'm looking at these, the piano roll here, so this has labeled all of these C notes. I know that somewhere over the rainbow is in the key of C, which means it only uses white keys. And I know that that it begins on C. So right, like because I can see E if I were to count back down to the next space. So E, D, C. So let me go over here, and if I can look at this notation, and let's just do the first two measures. So the first two measures go C, C, B, G, A, B, C. Okay. If I go over to the MIDI editing window over here, so I can, like, already, I'm looking here at this MIDI editing window. What I want to, let's see if I can get, oh, right. I know that the shortest value is an eighth note, so I don't want to deal with 16th notes. If I now zoom out a little bit so we can just see these first two measures. So I know that the first note is this C, so I'm going to, so I just double clicked here, and that gave me a C note. Now I can drag this C note out for the duration of that first C. I know the next, and so notice as I hover over these different lines in the piano roll, it's highlighting the key that I would be inputting on if I were to double click there. So then I have to go up to this C. So I just double click, and then I'm going to drag it over. I know that the next pitch is a B, which is directly beneath that C that I just put in, and it is for one beat or a quarter note. Okay. Then I know the next pitch is a G, and this is only for a half note, so there we go. And I know the next one is an A. So now these next two notes are quarter notes, and it is a B and a C. Okay, so what I've done is I've been using this grid to tell me how long the notes are going to last for, and I know they're going to last because I'm just following these numbers, right? This is the first measure, 1, second beat of first measure, third beat of first measure, fourth beat of first measure, second measure, second beat of second measure, etc., etc. So let's listen and see if I got it right. All right, I did. The tempo is a little slow, but the way that I did this is I was really just kind of going back and forth between looking here. These lines are very much just like looking at, so the lines on the traditional notation are just like looking at these lines in a MIDI editor window. Looking at these, thinking about these MIDI these rhythmic values are just like looking at the ruler in a MIDI editing window, right? So if I were to continue this, I would be able to just figure this out by knowing where the C is, where the D is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and I could reproduce musical notation in the MIDI window. So let me take you through maybe doing the full melody. So let's increase the tempo here. So we had the first couple measures. Let's make it faster. Okay. So here we have the first two measures. So I know that the next pitch was C for half of the measure, and then the next one was A for half of the measure, and the next one was a G for a full measure. Okay. Then we go to an A beneath that C that we started on for half of a measure. And then we go to an F for half of a measure. And then we go to an E for a beat. And then what is it? E, B, D, do, 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 do. Yeah. Then C, D, do, 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 do. E for a quarter beat, F for a quarter beat. And again, here is that shorter dun 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 dun. And the next one is D for a quarter beat, sorry. B for an eighth. So here, this completes the entire 8-measure melody. And again, I was just kind of going back and forth, looking at the music notation and seeing how the lines of the staves map onto the lines here. You'll notice that there's some, like for instance, this darker division between B and C also helps me to see what octave I'm in the MIDI editing window. But yeah, let's see if I got this correct. All right, I did it. So we can see here again. Like, let me just pull up the notation again. So the notation, just to emphasize, this measure correlates with this measure. This measure correlates with this measure. This measure correlates with this measure, and on and on. So dun 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 dun. So really, we are looking at something very, 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 very similar as far as notation is concerned, and MIDI and the MIDI editing window. This is also a way that you can start to think about going back and forth between something you might play on a piano and ways in which you might compose or reimagine something that you've put in. And that's what I want to talk about next. Okay, so I've put this Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody in. Let's say that I want to add a rhythm, like some rhythm to that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to loops. Now, loops, a lot of you are messing around with loops for your sound collage project and came up with some really interesting ideas. So these loops are organized. There are a whole bunch of them here, and these loops they come with Studio One. It's like pre-composed little fragments of music that you can use to build up your own music. And since there are so many, you can search through the database of loops in a variety of ways. And what I've done here, so for instance, I could search through by style, right? I could search through by instrument, if there's a particular instrument I wanted to use. But here, I want to search through by type because I want to make sure that I'm using a MIDI file, not an audio file. So what a lot of you noticed probably as you were toying around and experimenting with bringing different loops into your Studio One session. So these are audio files. If I open up this, what we'll find is the file name, the file type right here is called an audio loop, and what that means. Let me just drag one over. So for instance, if I were to drag over this audio loop, it created automatically an audio track. So this is audio, right? So it's like a blues bass line. I cannot independently change any of these notes to different places. If I wanted to change the rhythm a little bit, I would have to nudge it from, I'd have to splice it out. And you guys are all super familiar with that from the last project. However, let me just get rid of this right here. However, what I want you guys to be looking into are the musical files. So if you go up into sort by, type, and you go into type. If you look into musical files, all of these are going to be MIDI files, okay? So they're all going to say music loop at the end, and what that means is they're going to be MIDI files. Now, why this is useful is, like I said, MIDI notes are independently editable. So, for instance, let's say, so I have the Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody. Let's say I wanted to put I'm going to drag this Brazilian rhythm over, okay? So now when I drag this over, you can tell already that I created an instrument track or a MIDI track just by dragging it over, right? And I have this muted, so let's just listen to the rhythm that was brought over. Okay, so and here are all the different sounds that are happening in that rhythm, and I can see this all in the MIDI editor. Okay, so let me play that again. So it's a whole bunch of percussion. We can see here it's playing, right? All of these different sounds are happening, right? If I wanted to check out, if I open up the instrument here, I'll notice that what this is it's using the Brazilian kit. So all of the drum samples from the Brazilian kit are being played. Let's see. If I rewind here to the opening, and like a piano roll, like with a piano roll, I'm seeing which keys are being played when by the MIDI, right? So there is a MIDI file that I see here that's driving this program, and then these MIDI values are saying, okay, play this note now, again, and it's a whole bunch of them happening all at once, right? Okay, so if I go back over to my main Studio One window, I can see I have my Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody that is lasting 8 measures, and this is really only for one measure. So if I copy and paste it, so now if I unmute my Somewhere Over the Rainbow melody and I rewind to the beginning, we will hear Somewhere Over the Rainbow along with a Brazilian rhythm. Okay, so now, like, what I've done is this is a melody that I inputted myself. I've now brought over a rhythm that is provided by Studio One. Now, of course, if I wanted to, I could modify this rhythm. There's a lot going on, but let's say that I'm going through here and oops. Well, already I edited it. I just erased one of these. So let's say I'm going through here and I realize, okay, we have this sort of double bass drum hit that is happening on all of these beats. So like, let's listen again. So dung 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 dung. So yeah, it's happening on all of these beats. What if I wanted it to kind of go dung 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 dung, something like that? Dung. So I'm gonna go back, listen to it. Dung, 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 dung. Okay. So what I could do is just select these two, and I'm gonna copy. And then if I put this here, right? So what this should have done is created a rhythm that now goes dung 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 dung. So let's listen to that. Yeah. So basically, I could go through and modify this rhythm that I dragged over from the loops, and now I can kind of like go through and say, all right, well now I've kind of made it. So this allows this, and I could, if I really wanted to, I could dig into all of these like little hits and sort of modify the rhythm that way. Point being, I can change this rhythm how I see fit. I can recompose this rhythm just by going in here and adjusting copying and pasting like we did with audio, but again, now we're just using individual notes. And also by changing the velocities and all of this. So this is another thing I want you to mess around with is bringing loops over into tracks. Try composing melodies. Try bringing loops over and modifying them. Here's another thing that is interesting to mess with. So, as we know, MIDI does not make sound. MIDI is just a way for different instruments to interface. So we have this. In this MIDI track number 2, we have this particular rhythm, and when I dragged it over, it set us up with a Brazilian kit. But that doesn't mean we have to use a Brazilian kit. We could use. Let's try. What might be interesting? Well, let's just go for. We'll start with the percussion thing, and then I'll do something that has more pitches involved. So we had a Brazilian kit. Maybe we can go over to a... drum kits over here. I was looking for drum kits and percussion. Okay. Like, what if I went over to something like a funky kit, right? And what you'll notice is I've changed the kit, but the same MIDI information is still there. So now if we listen to this will be the same rhythms but with different instruments. Okay. So again, just the rhythm has not changed at all. I'm just changing the sounds that are being triggered by the MIDI information in a stream. So, and I was just going between different percussion tracks, but we could also say we could do something really weird, like, well, what would this sound like if it were a clavinet? Whoops. So, now, obviously, there are all sorts of. This could give you all sorts of ideas on how to experiment. So, in other words, a good starting point is to just start grabbing some of these loops, some of these music loops, or MIDI files. Really, is the way that we should be thinking of this in here. They call them music loops. Really, they are MIDI files, and move them over and start experimenting both with editing within the MIDI window, moving notes around as you're listening to it loop, changing velocity, but also you could mess around with changing the program in the presence instrument to like use totally different sound libraries. The other thing I'd like you to try to experiment with is inputting melodies on your own. So you could do it the way that I did it by programming them directly into the MIDI editing window, or you could use your keyboard, either the QWERTY keyboard or some other MIDI keyboard, and start messing around, seeing if you can kind of compose a melody or something. Next week, we'll be digging deeper into all of this, and I will be discussing your looking back at your sound collage assignments and talking about them a little bit. So I will see you all then. We'll also be dealing with harmony and rhythm. So that should all be that should be interesting as we build up these musical parameters. So I will see you then. Have a great weekend. Bye.